Hi, everybody. So, AI is all the rage these days. It's all anyone wants to talk about, it seems, in the IT industry. And now Microsoft has released their own AI, their own generative AI. Called Copilot. And there's a few different forms of Copilot. There's a public Copilot that you can access through, for instance, Bing. You can ask it stuff. And then there's the Copilot for Microsoft 365. I think they're calling it Copilot with grounded chat. Grounding is what you use, or what the AI can use for its responses. So when you type in something into the prompt, you can reference documents and information inside of Microsoft 365. In fact, you can use anything that you have access to in Copilot. In fact, if you just ask Copilot to go find stuff or to try and figure out something, or if you ask it about what you have access to, it's probably going to find the stuff that you have access to that you didn't even know you had access to. And oh boy, is that frightening quite a few people. So let's talk just a little bit about how we can sort of start to secure information from Microsoft Copilot. And then also we might talk a little bit about how to restrict information from public Gen AI as well. Stay tuned. Okay, everybody, let's take a look at a couple of notes that I've made to get us a start. And how do we protect ourselves or protect information from these Gen AI services, including Microsoft's Copilot for Microsoft 365 or Graph Grounded Chat, whatever we choose to call it. Well, here's the issue. The main issue is that Copilot, if I have a license for Copilot, then Copilot can act on my behalf and it can access everything that I have access to. How do I separate Copilot's access from my access? You cannot do that right now. Now, I'm sure Microsoft's working on that, but right now you cannot do that. So that's an issue, right? Probably a big issue, because one thing that people are worried about, and rightly so, is that, well, we've created a bunch of SharePoint sites and teams. And at my company, for instance, let's say that when a new person comes on board, we're not quite mature in our permission structures. So what people do is, well, they just copy somebody else's permissions and we make that the same as this person. Well, so if somebody jumps into, the accounting department or the HR department, maybe they're copying permissions from somebody that they really shouldn't be, and all of a sudden this new person gains access to, let's say, a team and a library that maybe they don't even know about, but that team and that library might have information about all the employees at my company, their salary structure, their personal information, their social security numbers. And this person who is in the HR department maybe should never have access to that, but oops, they do. Well, it also means then that if I license them for Copilot, Copilot has access to that as well. So what? Well, what if the person goes into Copilot and asks it to write a summary of a salary structure for a typical company? And let's take my company as an example. Well, Copilot might just go out there and what do you know? It finds all the salary for people and it writes it right in front of that user. Maybe that user sends it to someone. So you can see where the problem might occur. So, is there anything that we can do? Well, there is a couple of things that you can do. Number one, Have everybody go into the sites that they own, SharePoint sites, team sites, and decide who needs access and who doesn't. Complete review of all the SharePoint sites and all the team sites. That's really the main thing that you have to do. I know that's the hardest thing in the world to do, right? But it's what we all have to do. We're going to have to go in and start trimming all of these permissions. Something we should have done a long time ago, but we didn't. Well, now we got a real super good reason for doing it. So that's what we're going to end up having to do. Okay, but it's going to take a little while, right? We'll talk about a quick way that you can start getting the ball rolling on that in a second with access reviews. But let's look at some real super quick wins that we can maybe take advantage of in the meantime. So most of the information we're worried about is in SharePoint. We can actually do a little bit in SharePoint to limit what Copilot can find. And the way we do that is we remove a site, a team, whatever, library, from the index, okay, from the semantic index of the SharePoint index, the index, well, whatever we want to call it. The index is how we find everything. When you go to search for stuff in Teams, or you go to search for things in SharePoint, you're not actually looking through all the databases, in the back end on SQL, looking for stuff. All this stuff is crawled just like it is on the internet, and an index is made, and that's what you actually search through. So if a site is removed from the index, then Copilot won't be able to find it. Is it just Copilot that won't be able to find it? What about everybody else? Yeah, nobody will be able to find it. It's gone from the index. Now, if you know where a site is, of course, you still have access. You can go there. You can get to what you need. But you can't just go and search for something if it's not part of the index. So that's the first thing. Step number one here, or method number one, I should say, exclude a single site. You can go into the properties of a site, and then there's a little in the settings for a site, there's a little circle you can uncheck for indexing that site. And then no one will see that site after a little while. It'll be removed from the index. You got to do it on a site-by-site basis, though. So onesie, twosie. But let's find the crown jewels, right? Let's find the super important information, go to those sites, and let's start removing them. We'll add them back later when we got our permission structure properly set up. But for now, maybe we remove the HR sites with all the users' information from the index. Probably not a good, much of a reason to keep that in there anyway, right? So let's move forward and do that. Is that perfect? No, obviously, I already talked about the fact that search won't work at all for those sites. So that's imperfect, but there's another imperfection. And that imperfection stems from the way that indexing works and how Microsoft tries to help people. If I visit a site a lot, then it's going to make it into my frequently used sites list. And that has its own index. And that index isn't stored in SharePoint. That index is stored in my mailbox, mine. We cannot exclude that from indexing. We cannot exclude Copilot from looking at that. So if I visited something, or if I made it a favorite even, it's not going to disappear from my index. So anyone who uses it a lot, it's going to be in their index. Maybe that's okay, because really we're worried about stuff that people don't know they have access to that they accidentally stumble upon. All right. Option 2 here. Microsoft came out with this option specifically in response to this Copilot issue. I'm going to move my microphone a little bit further away from. I feel it's intruding on my personal space bubble. So, and I'll put links to a couple of these in the notes. So the second one is turn on what Microsoft is calling restricted SharePoint search. And what this does is it basically turns off the entire index for all of SharePoint. And so you can't find anything in the SharePoint index. And then you go back and you can add up to 100 sites into the index. So it's the opposite, right, of step number one. This step just whacks everything from the index. Nobody can find anything, but then you can add up to 100 sites, teams/sites back into that index for people to find. So if you have a ton of stuff and you just don't know where to start, and boy, there's important stuff all over the place and it's a mess, this might be the option for you. Understand, this will negatively impact people's work because they won't be able to find anything that they haven't found in the past frequently or put into their favorites. They aren't going to be finding anything in normal searches. So that's a problem. But that's Microsoft's temporary solution. In fact, if you go to that site, I'll provide a link. They even say that here's a temporary solution for you. Don't leave this on because search is one of the most important SharePoint features, right? So that's number two. Number three. Well, number three, you can restrict SharePoint access to specific groups. And we can turn this on in kind of a global way. Again, I'll provide a link to this too. Say, well, I want to limit all these sites access to only the Office 365 group that's connected to the site. If we made a site that way or a team that way, that would actually boot everybody out of the site that had individual access. What does that do for us? Well, right there, it gets rid of a ton of people, and they won't have access to that anymore. They won't be able to find it because if you're booted out of a site, you don't have access to it. You won't find it either. Well, Copilot can't go in there and get something. It can only get stuff that you have access to. So that's pretty hardcore, but it's not a bad a way to go, and certainly not a bad thing to look at. It not only restricts what people could find and use in Copilot, it restricts their access entirely. Okay, so we're going much harder there. We're not just dealing with the index. So those are three ways that you could look at limiting what Copilot can access from SharePoint. But again, we cannot separate what Copilot can do and what the user can do. So that's the issue. And Microsoft, I know they're working on that. They'll have to come up with something better than that. But for right now, that's it. So that's why we're stuck with these imperfect solutions. There's another way. Labeling. And I'm going to talk about labeling in more detail in a second here. But labeling, sensitivity labeling. How can that help us? Well, there's a couple of ways that it can help us. There's a new labeling property, actually, that, let me move my my visage out of the way here so you can see what this says. There's a new labeling property that you will not see in the GUI. You got to do it from the PowerShell, but it's called Block Content Analysis Services. And if a label has that property on it as one of the permissions, and we'll have to encrypt information, and that label is applied to a file, then when users are inside of Word and they have that file open, assuming they have access to the file, or Excel or PowerPoint or Outlook, then those apps will not be able to send the content from that document to connected services in Microsoft. One of those connected services is Copilot. So one of the biggest ways that people are going to use Copilot is inside of something like Word. They're opening up a document and they're like, hey, Copilot, let's rearrange this or use the contents of this document or a paragraph in this document in a prompt to get me an answer or to create something else. So this will prevent anyone from using that information while they're using those Office products. So it's kind of a limited and imperfect solution. And it also turns off other things because you can't just turn off Copilot with this labeling or this label property. It'll also turn off any other connected services. What are those? Well, for instance, DLP prompts in Outlook, for instance. Outlook could not give the user a prompt saying, hey, it looks like you have X credit cards in this document. It's not going to do that, right? Also, auto labeling. won't work because that's a connected service. So there's a couple of connected services. And maybe auto labeling doesn't really matter. If we've already labeled the document with this property, maybe we don't really care about auto labeling it with something else. This is probably going to be our highest priority label anyway. But just so you know, this is something you can turn on, but there are consequences to it. Again, put a link to that in the description. All right, so let's talk about a couple of other things. I'm going to switch to my browser here. One of the things I mentioned, the end result, the end thing we want to do is we want to go review people's access in SharePoint. Again, SharePoint teams, that's our biggest worry. That's where company information is stored. How about my OneDrive? Well, yeah, but it's my OneDrive. It's, I know about all that stuff. It's there. I created it probably. What we're, again, worried about is some SharePoint site somewhere that we've accidentally given a lot of people access to that maybe we don't know about. And then, Copilot goes searching through and it finds stuff. So if we actually had been creating sites all along and we're really strict with permissions as to who accesses the site and who doesn't, we probably would be a lot less concerned. And there's a lot of companies out there who are less concerned because they have been very diligent about this. But most companies expedite or expeditiously created sites and gave people permissions. You know how it goes. So how do we go about clearing out those? Well, we could tell everybody, hey, go to all the sites that you know about and check the permissions. Great. Well, that's probably not going to fare very well because people forget. So what we can do is take advantage, if we have a license for it, in this case it would be a Microsoft E5 or a Security and Compliance E5 license, to do access reviews. Access reviews, I'm in the Entra portal right now, are under this identity governance section here. You can see access reviews here. Now, access reviews is sort of a newer thing, and licensing has changed somewhat recently on what you can do with access reviews. There's some automated access reviews that require now a governance license. Basic access reviews, like choosing a bunch of sites and saying, hey, send an email to the owner of these sites and tell that owner to walk through and decide who can stay and who's got to go. That's available with the regular E5 license, but other stuff, the more advanced stuff, isn't. So check the licensing for that. Make sure that you have the correct license. All right. You can see I have a couple of reviews I've made already. And to create an access review, we click on the plus here and we tell it we want to review what? Teams and groups. This is sites, but most times people make sites via a team. You make a team, it creates a group, creates a site, and this is what usually we create. So this is probably going to solve a lot of the problems. So review scope, I could do a guest review. Yes, that's important as well. But what I'm worried right now about is my internal people finding stuff. So I'm going to choose some teams or groups here, and I want to ask the owner to review them. So here I got a bunch of stuff in here. I'll do, I don't know, do that one. Let's do Chicago. Let's get rid of whatever this one is. We'll just do Chicago. I'll select the Chicago one. And the scope is, well, I want to review all the users that are in that, not just the guests. So I'll click on next, and it's going to ask me who's going to do reviewing. I could choose specific people. Maybe I have a compliance group and I can just put it on them and I can choose them here. What I probably want to do first is do the owners. That's a little bit easier. And I can even do users can review their own access. That's even easier. Maybe send that one out first. Get the low-hanging fruit, have people remove their own access so I don't bother the owners and they have less work to do. That's not a bad strategy either. But sooner or later, you want to do group owners. You might even want to follow that up with a specific group that then double checks it. But a lot of extra work. So I'm going to choose group owners. I can have fallback reviewers, how long the review lasts, how often it happens. I'll do it one time here and then when it starts. Okay. All right. And then a couple other things. Anything else that want to auto apply results. Yeah, I kind of do want to do that. I'm going to say, well, if we don't respond, well, tough luck, access goes away. We can always add access back in there, but if I'm really worried about this, I probably want to automatically do that. A couple of other things, justification on why people should stay, notifications, just I'll do all that. And then I got to give it a name and create it. So I've already created a couple though. I have a project Y group and a project X group, and I've created reviews for them. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a little remote desktop. Go to my Hyper-V environment, and I'm going to open up the mail of this guy named Brett. Now, Brett is the owner of both Project X and Project Y. I've started a review for both of those. I've said I want the owner to do the review. Brett's the owner. Brett gets these two emails, one for Project X and one for Project Y. Here's the one for Project X, and you can see he's got a button here called Start Review. You can also just go to My Access to find things directly, but this takes him there. All right, so this opens up his reviews, and the first thing he sees is this. Okay, all of these people have access. Should they all still have access? Well, he can leave it as approve, or he can come in here and change things. Let's say that these two people, we really don't need them anymore. We'll see they don't need access anymore, and we'll submit that. All right, so you can see how this goes. So this is a good way to start eliminating people. Now those two people are going to be removed from the access to that site. And then Brett can, of course, go back and do the other site as well. You get the idea. So this is a really good way to jumpstart the whole access part of things. So look at that. Access reviews, make sure you have a proper license to use it, and do take advantage of it. It's a great tool, a newer tool, not too new, but licensing has changed recently, so do take a look at the licensing. All right, what about anything else? Yep, we'll look at some other stuff here. Let me get rid of this. I mentioned labeling. Everyone wants to know if labeling can help them with this, and it actually can to some extent. I mentioned before that a label can be prevented from sending information to connected services. That's one thing. But there's an even bigger thing to a label. As everyone knows, sensitivity labels used to be called Azure Information Protection labels. We don't use that term anymore. Let's use the new term, sensitive information or sensitivity labels, which are part of the Microsoft Information Protection, MIP now. MIP labels can do a lot of things, right? Number one, you can have some markings on the file, headers, footers. That's all good. Even watermarks on the file. Number two, we can use them labeled information in DLP policies. We can say, well, anything labeled company confidential, let's not let it go out, or let's only let it go to certain places. And then we can do this extra thing, encryption. Encryption for labels uses an old service called the Rights Management Service. This service is super old. It's back 2012. It came out, or 2013, one of those two. In Windows Server came out in 2012 R2, so whenever that came out. And this was a way to encrypt and keep a list of who has access and what access they have to any file that's been labeled. And of course, we use our normal our Office documents, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, emails. And then PDFs is added. It's pretty good functionality on PDFs, and we can actually label some other stuff with a Purview plugin. But really, for the most part, we're talking about our Office documents. Those are the easiest ones because this labeling fits right in. It works right with the products themselves, whether it's the web version or the full versions. So what we can do is say that I want to create a label, and I only want this group, let's say the HR group, to have any access to this label. But I'm going to go further. I'm going to say the HR group, they can read the file, but they can't save or print it, or they can't do save as or print. You can do stuff like that. Well, there's another permission called copy. It's actually called extract under the covers. And extract is the one we're actually concerned with in Copilot, because as it turns out, a user needs the extract permission in order for information from a file to be fed to Copilot. So, of course, you need view as well. But extract is the one that that is going to make the difference here. If you take extract out of the picture, then people cannot use the contents of that file for Copilot. They also can't do a copy, so that's going to be a limit as well. But that's how Copilot gets stuff. It uses that extract. So going into one of these labels, you can see I actually have a label down here I've created called Copilot Restriction. Let's get into that. I'll edit that, and we'll close things out here. This has been a lot longer of a video than I actually had planned. Sorry about that, but it's interesting stuff, and everybody's worried about this right now. So let's finish this up. I'm going to click on next here to get past the normal stuff. I see I'm applying this to items. Okay, I need to apply it to items, files, emails, meetings. Yes. Mainly we're concerned with files and emails here. Control access. Yeah, that's what I want to do. That's permissions. It used to say permissions. Now it says control access. I'm going to click on next. Assign permissions. Yes, I want to assign permissions. Do that. Don't let users assign permissions. You're not going to have the experience that you want with that. Okay. So assign your own permissions. User access to content expires. Never allow offline access always. We prefer those to be left alone. Again, those affect things negatively. The content expiration, that's going to screw up a couple of things. Try not to use that. Below that, we see assign permissions, and you can see, I'm going to click on assign permissions here. I've actually have some assigned permissions. I'm going to click on choose permissions so you can see this. So I've chosen the choose permissions here, and I see all the permissions I have right now under co-author. Now, these are built in. Co-owner, co-author, reviewer, viewer, and then custom. Okay? Custom's the only one I can choose if I want to come in here and check and uncheck things. All right? So you can see that most, or a couple of these, let's go to co-owner. That has the copy and extract, or extract. This is the one we're worried about right here. Co-owner has that. Co-author, that's got it. Okay. Reviewer, that doesn't have it. Okay. So if you want to just keep it simple and choose built-in ones, reviewer is the one that you want. And then viewer does not have it. So if I wanted to make my own and let the people do a lot of stuff, I could do save, print, reply for emails, obviously, forward. Maybe I don't want to do that. Export, this is save as, all sorts of, I can do whatever I want, but if I leave this copy and extract alone, if I don't choose that, that will turn off Copilot for this document. Okay, so if you want to start using labels, that's the one you want to look at if you're interested in preventing things from going to Copilot. Now I know, what about all the files I have already? Well, you can't really change those. When you change a label, you have to go back and modify the permissions that were already on a file. There's a lot of complexities involved with when you modify labels, delete labels, what happens to files that are already labeled. So it's not going to do magic for you. But in the future, for the future, if we're interested in what would take away Copilot's ability to get to data, this is it. Leave off the extract. All right. All right. I think we'll leave it there. I'll put some links in the description. We will take a look at using external services, because that's the other thing we're worried about. What about everybody going to ChatGPT and all these other AI services, taking documents that they have, that they've created, and maybe saying, boy, I need to punch this thing up. I don't have a Copilot license. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go up to ChatGPT. I'm going to copy all this stuff and put it up there, or just put the file up there. And then some Gen AI, you can actually use files. Not a whole lot of them, but some of them. Either way, I'm going to put that information out there and then have it come back and give me something. Well, that's a problem too, right? Because we don't want some Gen AI in the cloud taking our information from our company, making up another document. Maybe we send that somewhere. It's just, we got a bad feeling about that, and you should have a bad feeling about that. So what do we do then? Well, this is a case for DLP. Now, all these Gen AIs, they can consider them SaaS apps, right? And when we think about controlling SaaS apps, what do we think of? Well, we probably think of Cloud App Security Broker. Microsoft calls theirs Defender for Cloud Apps. That ain't going to help you. Defender for Cloud Apps or Cloud App Security Brokers for DLP, that works great if you have connected your Cloud App Security Broker with that cloud app. If you have administrative control on that cloud app, if you've set it up so that you control everything, yeah, great. Then you can do that. What about just random sites on the internet? You can't do that with Cloud App Security. They can tell you maybe through discovery that somebody's using them, but in order to control them, you got to connect them up. So is there another way to do it? And there is. A couple ways. Number one, we could use web filtering. Microsoft has built-in Defender for Endpoint. You can use web filtering, network protection to prevent people from even going to those sites. Yeah, that's good, but again, we're totally preventing it. We have another option. In Microsoft, that option will be Endpoint DLP. Endpoint DLP, higher license again, but Endpoint DLP allows us to prevent our information through DLP rules, our secure or sensitive information, from going to certain websites. Right. Also, if we've set up Endpoint DLP and onboarded our devices, we can actually get a nice amount of information from something called the AI Hub. I'll switch over to this, the portal I have here. I'll put this in the description as well. You can actually see who's connecting to all these AI places, ChatGPT and a bunch of other ones. Microsoft has a couple of dozen that they're keeping track of. Now you got to onboard your devices. You got to do a couple of other things. Open up install some extensions for Chrome and Firefox, so it reports to the Purview a client that's on those devices. So you got to do some work for this. The license isn't going to get you there. You got to be licensed, but then you got to onboard and configure it correctly. And then you can use this new AI Hub, which by the way is in preview. It's actually nice. It tells you who's going where, how often, things like that. So you get some feedback, and then you can start using some DLP rules. So I think we'll talk about that later when we get a little bit more into Endpoint DLP, a very exciting subject that I hope you revisit this site for. But until then, stay safe out there.